Maria Santos had always been different from the other female soldiers in the 42nd Infantry Unit. While most of them came from military families or had dreamed of serving their country since childhood, Maria joined the Army for one reason only: to escape the poverty that had trapped her family for generations. At 22 years old, she was the daughter of a street vendor who sold newspapers on busy corners in downtown Manila. Her father worked 16 hours a day just to put rice on the table, and her mother took in laundry from wealthy families to earn a few extra pesos. When military recruiters visited her neighborhood promising steady pay, free meals, and a chance for education, Maria saw it as her family's only way out. But from the moment she arrived at Camp Aguinaldo for basic training, Maria realized she had walked into a nightmare she could never have imagined. The military base was a world where rank meant everything, and as a new recruit from the slums, she was at the very bottom of a cruel hierarchy. Sergeant Elena Vasquez ran the female barracks with an iron fist. A career soldier who had clawed her way up through 20 years of service, Vasquez seemed to take particular pleasure in making life miserable for soldiers she deemed unworthy of wearing the uniform. Maria, with her thick provincial accent and second-hand boots, became an immediate target. The harassment started small. Vasquez would make Maria clean the same toilet 3 times while other recruits rested. She would assign her kitchen duty during meal times, forcing Maria to eat cold leftovers alone after everyone else had finished. When Maria's bunkmates tried to share their food or help with extra chores, Vasquez would punish them too, ensuring Maria's isolation. "You think this is some charity program, Santos?" Vasquez would sneer during morning inspections, deliberately mispronouncing Maria's last name. "This is the Philippine Army, not a homeless shelter. Maybe you should go back to selling newspapers with your daddy." The other female recruits quickly learned to avoid Maria. They had their own struggles with the demanding training schedule, and nobody wanted to become Vasquez's next target. Maria understood their fear, but the loneliness cut deep. She would lie awake at night listening to the other girls whisper and laugh quietly in their bunks, feeling like an outsider in a place that was supposed to be her new home. Physical training became another form of torture. While Vasquez pushed all the recruits hard, she seemed to find creative ways to make Maria suffer more. During morning runs, Maria would be forced to carry extra weight in her pack. During combat drills, she would be paired with the strongest male recruits who were told to not go easy on the charity case. Maria's body ached constantly, but she refused to quit. Every bruise and exhausted muscle reminded her of why she was there. Back home, her younger brother needed surgery for a heart condition they couldn't afford. Her parents were getting older and weaker, unable to work as many hours as before. The monthly salary from the Army, small as it was, represented hope for her family's future, but Vasquez seemed determined to break that hope. 3 months into training, the harassment escalated beyond anything Maria had experienced. It started with small thefts. Maria's soap would disappear from her locker, her spare socks would go missing, her letters from home would be crumpled and thrown in the trash. When Maria reported the incidents, Vasquez would smile coldly and suggest that maybe Maria was just being careless with her belongings. The message was clear: no one would help her, and complaining would only make things worse. The breaking point came on a sweltering Tuesday morning, during what should have been a routine uniform inspection. Maria had spent an hour the night before, making sure her fatigues were perfectly pressed, her boots polished to a mirror shine, her hair pinned back in regulation style. She stood at attention with the other recruits as Vasquez moved down the line, finding minor flaws to criticize in each soldier's appearance. When Vasquez reached Maria, she stopped and circled her slowly like a predator studying its prey. Maria kept her eyes fixed straight ahead, trying to control her breathing as the sergeant's cold gaze examined every inch of her uniform. "Well, well," Vasquez said finally, her voice carrying across the silent barracks. It looks like Private Santos thinks she can hide her inadequacies under a pressed uniform. Maria's heart pounded, but she remained silent. Speaking without permission during inspection would result in immediate punishment. Vasquez stepped closer, her face inches from Maria's ear. I've been watching you, Santos. 3 months here, and you still don't understand what it means to be a soldier. You think good behavior and shiny boots will make us forget where you came from? The other recruits stood frozen in their positions, afraid to move or even breathe loudly. Everyone could feel the tension building, the sense that something terrible was about to happen. You know what I think? Vasquez continued, her voice rising so everyone could hear. I think you're hiding something. I think underneath that uniform, you're still the same dirty street girl who begged her way into our army. Maria's face burned with humiliation, but she forced herself to remain still. She had endured months of Vasquez's cruelty, and she could endure this too. Whatever was coming, she would survive it for her family. But nothing could have prepared her for what Vasquez said next. Strip. The single word hung in the air like a physical blow. Maria's eyes widened in shock, but she didn't move. I said strip, Private Santos. Right here, right now. If you're going to be a soldier in my unit, I need to make sure you meet our standards of cleanliness and health. The demand was outrageous, humiliating, and completely outside military protocol. But Maria knew that in this place, Vasquez's word was law. Refusing would mean court-martial, discharge, and the end of any hope for her family's future. With trembling hands, Maria began to remove her uniform jacket. The other recruits stared straight ahead, their faces pale with shock and sympathy. Nobody dared to speak or intervene. As Maria's jacket fell to the floor, Vasquez's smile grew wider. Faster, Santos. We don't have all day. Maria's hands shook as she unbuttoned her shirt. Tears of rage and humiliation burned in her eyes. But she refused to let them fall. She would not give Vasquez the satisfaction of seeing her completely broken. But as her shirt joined her jacket on the floor, something unexpected happened. Vasquez's expression suddenly changed from cruel satisfaction to shocked confusion. Her eyes were fixed on Maria's exposed waist, where a distinctive birthmark was clearly visible just above her left hip. The mark was unusual, dark and perfectly circular, about the size of a coin. Maria had been self-conscious about it her entire life, always wearing shirts that covered it completely. She had no idea why Vasquez was staring at it with such intensity. Where? Vasquez whispered, her voice barely audible. Where did you get that mark? Maria stood there in her undershirt and pants, confused by the sudden change in the sergeant's demeanor. I was born with it, Sergeant. It's just a birthmark. Vasquez took a step backward, her face pale. For the first time since Maria had known her, the sergeant looked genuinely shaken. Her usual confidence and cruelty seemed to evaporate as she continued to stare at the mark. What's your mother's name? Vasquez asked suddenly. Carmen Santos, Sergeant, Maria replied, still confused by the strange turn the inspection had taken. Vasquez's hands began to tremble. She looked around at the other recruits who were still standing at attention but clearly bewildered by what was happening. Dismissed, she said abruptly. Everyone except Santos. Get out of here now. The other recruits quickly filed out of the barracks, grateful to escape whatever was happening, but curious about the dramatic change in their sergeant's behavior. Maria remained standing there, half-dressed and completely confused. When they were alone, Vasquez sank down onto one of the bunks, her head in her hands. The transformation was so complete that Maria wondered if she was witnessing some kind of breakdown. Sergeant? Maria ventured carefully. Is everything okay? Vasquez looked up at her, and Maria was shocked to see tears in the older woman's eyes. For months, Vasquez had been a figure of pure authority and cruelty, Seeing her vulnerable and emotional was like watching a statue come to life. "Get dressed," Vasquez said quietly. "We need to talk." Maria quickly put her uniform back on, her mind racing with questions. The woman who had tormented her for months now sat on the bunk, looking like a completely different person. The cruel mask had fallen away, revealing someone who seemed lost and deeply troubled. "Sit down," Vasquez said, her voice barely above a whisper. She gestured to the bunk across from her. "Please." The word "please" from Sergeant Vasquez was so unexpected that Maria almost didn't believe she had heard it correctly. She sat down cautiously, still not understanding what had caused such a dramatic change. Vasquez was silent for a long moment, staring at her hands. When she finally spoke, her voice was thick with emotion. "That birthmark," she said. "My sister had one exactly like it. In the exact same place." Maria's confusion deepened. "Your sister, Sergeant?" "Had," Vasquez repeated, emphasizing the past tense. "She died 23 years ago, or at least I thought she did." The older woman stood up and walked to her footlocker. She pulled out a small wooden box that looked like it had been handled countless times over the years. With trembling fingers, she opened it and removed a faded photograph. "This is Elena Rose," she said, handing the photo to Maria. "She was my baby sister. She would be your age now if she had lived." Maria looked at the photograph and gasped. The image showed a young woman who could have been her twin. The same dark hair, the same facial structure, even the same gentle smile that Maria saw in her own mirror every morning. The resemblance was so striking it made her hands shake. "I don't understand," Maria whispered. Vasquez sat back down, her composure cracking further. "Elena Rose was born when I was 15. Our parents died in a typhoon when she was just 2 years old. I tried to take care of her, but I was just a kid myself. We were living on the streets, begging for food, sleeping in doorways." She paused, wiping tears from her eyes. "I thought joining the military would give me a chance to provide for both of us. The recruiters promised housing for families, but when I got to basic training, they told me children weren't allowed on base. They said I had to choose between the army and my sister." Maria listened in stunned silence as the story continued. "I was 17 and desperate. There was a family in our old neighborhood, the Santosis. They had always been kind to us, even though they didn't have much themselves. Carmen Santos had just lost a baby, and when I begged them to take care of Elena Rose temporarily, they agreed." The pieces began clicking into place in Maria's mind, but the implications were too enormous to believe. "I promised I would come back for her," Vasquez continued. "I thought if I could establish myself in the military, save some money, maybe get promoted, I could create a stable home for us. But the military kept me busy with training, deployments, transfers. Every time I tried to get leave to visit, something came up." She pulled out another item from the box. A letter, yellowed with age. "After 2 years, I finally managed to get back to Manila. But when I went to the Santos house, the neighbors told me there had been a fire. They said the whole family had died, Carmen, her husband, and the little girl they had taken in." Maria's world tilted on its axis. "But that's not... I mean, my parents are alive. I just got a letter from them last week." Vasquez looked up sharply. "What did you say their names were?" "Your parents?" "Carmen and Roberto Santos," Maria replied, her voice barely audible. "Roberto," Vasquez repeated. "Carmen's husband was named Miguel when I left Elena Rose with them." The two women stared at each other as the truth began to emerge. Vasquez reached for another photograph from her box, this one showing her as a young teenager holding a tiny baby. "This was taken the day before I left Elena Rose with the Santos family," she said. "Look at the back." Maria turned the photograph over. In faded ink, someone had written, "Elena, and baby, Elena Rose, May 15th. Elena Rose has the angel mark, just like Mama used to say. We'll keep her safe always. Maria's birthmark had always been called her angel mark by the woman she knew as her mother. Carmen Santos had told her it was a sign of protection, something special that would watch over her throughout her life. The fire, Vasquez said slowly. Maybe it wasn't as bad as the neighbors thought. Maybe Carmen and Roberto survived, but they thought I was dead. Military families sometimes get wrong information about casualties. The room fell silent as both women processed the possibility that had seemed impossible just minutes earlier. "Tell me about your childhood," Vasquez said urgently. "Tell me everything you remember about growing up with the Santos family." Maria's mind was reeling, but she tried to organize her memories. "I always wondered why I looked so different from my parents. Carmen has light skin and Roberto is very tall, but I'm darker and smaller. They said I took after a relative who died young." She paused, thinking. "And there were always things they wouldn't talk about, like why we moved from our old house when I was very small, why we didn't have any photos from when I was a baby, why Carmen would sometimes cry when she looked at me." Vasquez was crying openly now. "She was protecting you. If she thought I was dead, if she thought you had no family left, she would have raised you as her own daughter. Carmen Santos was always the kindest person I knew." "But why didn't you try to find out more?" Maria asked. "Why did you just accept that everyone had died?" "I was 18 years old and devastated," Vasquez replied. "I had lost everything I cared about in the world. The military became my life because it was all I had left. I threw myself into my career, trying to forget the pain. I told myself that if I became successful enough, strong enough, maybe I could honor Elena Rose's memory by being the soldier she never got to see me become." She looked directly at Maria. "But instead, I became bitter and cruel. I saw young soldiers like you, soldiers who reminded me of the sister I had failed to protect, and I took out all my pain and guilt on them." The confession hung between them like a bridge neither was sure they should cross. Maria struggled to process the idea that the woman who had made her life miserable for months might actually be her sister. "How can we be sure?" Maria asked finally. "How can we know for certain?" Vasquez wiped her eyes and stood up with renewed purpose. "There are ways to find out: DNA tests, birth records, adoption papers. But first I need to make some phone calls." She walked to her desk and picked up the base telephone. "I'm calling the records office in Manila. If you were officially adopted by the Santos family, there will be documentation." As Vasquez dialed, Maria sat in stunned silence. Everything she had believed about her life, her family, her identity was suddenly in question. The parents who had raised her with love and sacrifice might not be her biological family. The sergeant who had tormented her might be her long-lost sister. After several minutes of being transferred between different offices, Vasquez finally reached someone who could help. Maria watched as her expression changed from hope to excitement to certainty. "Yes, I understand," Vasquez said into the phone. "Elena Rose Vasquez, born March 3, 1999, placed with the Santos family in May 2001 after a family emergency. Yes, I'll wait." She covered the phone's mouthpiece and looked at Maria. "They found the records. Informal adoption, never finalized legally because they couldn't locate the biological family. The child was listed as Elena Rose Vasquez until she was 5, when the Santos family changed her name to Maria Santos for school enrollment." Maria felt dizzy. "Elena Rose. I remember now. When I was very small, Carmen used to call me Rosa sometimes. She said it was because I was her little flower, but I thought it was just a nickname." Vasquez returned to her phone call. After a few more minutes, she hung up and turned to Maria with tears streaming down her face. "It's you," she whispered. "Elena Rose, my baby sister, you're alive." The two women looked at each other across 23 years of separation, loss, and pain. Maria felt overwhelmed by emotions she couldn't name. Joy, confusion, anger, relief all swirling together in her chest. "I don't know what to say," Maria admitted. "Part of me is happy, but part of me is angry. You made my life hell for months. You humiliated me, isolated me, made me feel worthless." Vasquez nodded, her face filled with shame. "I know, and I can never take that back. I saw so much of myself in you. The poverty, the determination, the way you refused to give up no matter how badly I treated you. It reminded me of all my failures, all the ways I had let my sister down." She stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the training grounds where recruits were running morning drills. "I became exactly the kind of person who would have destroyed the young girl I was trying to protect all those years ago. I became someone who hurt people instead of helping them." Maria joined her at the window. "But you didn't know it was me." "That's no excuse," Vasquez said firmly. "I treated you terribly because of my own pain and guilt. That's not leadership, that's cowardice." They stood in silence for a moment, watching the new recruits stumble through their exercises, just as Maria had months earlier. "What happens now?" Maria asked finally. Vasquez turned to face her. "Now, I need to figure out how to be the sister you deserved all along, and how to be the sergeant this unit deserves. I've been letting my personal demons poison everything around me." She walked back to her desk and pulled out a pen and paper. "First, I'm writing a letter to your parents. Our parents, I guess. To thank them for raising you with more love and wisdom than I ever could have provided. Second, I'm requesting a transfer to a different unit, so there won't be any conflicts of interest. And third," she paused, looking at Maria with hope and uncertainty in her eyes. "Third, I'm hoping you'll give me a chance to get to know my sister. Not as your sergeant, but as Elena, as the person I was before I let grief and guilt turn me into someone I hate." The news spread through the base like wildfire, though not in the way Maria had expected. Instead of the dramatic revelation becoming gossip, Sergeant Vasquez handled the situation with a professionalism that surprised everyone who knew her. Within 24 hours, she had submitted her transfer request and arranged for another sergeant to take over training duties for Maria's unit. She also called a meeting with the unit commander, Colonel Rodriguez, to explain the situation and ensure that Maria would receive fair treatment going forward. But the most important conversation happened that evening, when Vasquez sat down with Maria in the base's quiet chapel to talk about their future. "I've been thinking about this all day," Vasquez began, "and I realize that finding you doesn't erase the damage I've done. To you, to the other recruits I've mistreated over the years, to myself." Maria had been thinking too. The initial shock was wearing off, replaced by a complex mixture of emotions she was still trying to understand. "I'm angry," she said honestly. "Not just about what you did to me, but about all the years we lost. All the times I needed a big sister and didn't have one. All the times you needed a family and chose to be alone instead." Vasquez nodded. "You have every right to be angry." "But I'm also sad," Maria continued. "Sad for that 15-year-old girl who had to give up her baby sister to survive. Sad for the woman who spent 20 years believing her sister was dead. And sad for all the people you hurt because you were carrying that pain alone." They sat in silence for a moment, both processing the weight of everything that had happened. "Can I ask you something?" Maria said finally. "When you saw my birthmark, did you recognize it immediately?" "The second I saw it," Vasquez replied. "Our mother had the same mark. She used to tell me it was a sign that the women in our family were protected by angels. When Elena Rose was born with it, I thought it meant she would always be safe." "Maybe she was," Maria said softly. "Maybe that mark led her to Carmen and Roberto, who loved her and raised her well. And maybe it led her back to you when the time was right." Vasquez looked at her sister with wonder. How did you become so wise? I spent 20 years letting bitterness eat me alive, and you spent the same 20 years learning how to find hope in difficult situations. I had good parents, Maria said. Carmen and Roberto taught me that family isn't just about blood. It's about the people who choose to love you and support you, even when it's hard. Over the following weeks, as Vasquez's transfer was processed, the two sisters began the delicate process of getting to know each other. They met for coffee in the base cafeteria, took walks around the compound, and slowly shared the stories of their separate lives. Maria learned that Elena had always been an exceptional soldier, rising through the ranks faster than most of her peers. But she had also been known for her harsh treatment of recruits and her inability to form close relationships with her fellow soldiers. I told myself I was making them stronger, Vasquez explained during one of their conversations. But really, I was just sharing my misery. I thought if everyone else was as tough and isolated as I was, maybe I wouldn't feel so alone. Elena learned that Maria had excelled in school despite their family's poverty, earning scholarships that could have taken her to university. But she had chosen the military instead because she wanted to help her family immediately, rather than waiting for a degree to provide future opportunities. Carmen and Roberto never pressured me to join the army, Maria told her sister, but I could see how hard they were working just to survive. Roberto's back was getting worse from years of heavy lifting, and Carmen's hands were developing arthritis from all the washing she did. I wanted to take care of them the way they had taken care of me. As the sisters grew closer, other people on the base began to notice changes in both of them. Maria, freed from the constant harassment and stress, began to flourish in her training. Her fellow recruits, initially suspicious of her sudden improved treatment, gradually accepted that something significant had changed in the dynamics of their unit. The new sergeant, Sergeant Martinez, was firm but fair. Under his leadership, the training remained challenging, but the atmosphere of fear and cruelty that had characterized Vasquez's tenure disappeared. Soldiers began supporting each other instead of competing for survival. Maria found herself becoming a leader among her peers. Having endured months of abuse, she had a natural empathy for struggling recruits. She would quietly help soldiers who were falling behind, share her food with those who were homesick and couldn't eat, and provide encouragement during the hardest training exercises. Elena, meanwhile, was preparing for her transfer to a base in Cebu, where she would be working with experienced soldiers rather than new recruits. The change represented an opportunity for a fresh start, but also a chance to reflect on the kind of leader she wanted to be. I've requested assignment to a unit that works with disaster relief, she told Maria during one of their last conversations before the transfer. I want to spend my career helping people instead of breaking them down. The night before Elena's departure, the sisters drove into town to visit Carmen and Roberto Santos. The reunion was emotional and complicated. Carmen burst into tears the moment she saw Elena, and Roberto stood frozen in shock. I always wondered if you would come back someday, Carmen said through her tears. Every year on Elena Rose's birthday, I would pray that somehow you were alive and well. I thought you were all dead, Elena replied, embracing the woman who had raised her sister. If I had known... You did what you had to do, Roberto interrupted gently. You were just a child yourself. Carmen and I, we never regretted taking care of Elena Rose. She brought light into our lives when we needed it most. They spent the evening sharing stories and looking through photo albums. Carmen had carefully documented Maria's childhood, creating the family history that Elena had missed. There were pictures of first days of school, birthday celebrations, holiday gatherings, and quiet family moments. She was always special, Carmen told Elena. Smart, determined, kind to everyone. But sometimes I would catch her staring at herself in the mirror with such a sad expression. I think part of her always knew she was searching for something. Elena looked at her sister with pride and regret. I missed watching you grow up, I missed being there when you needed support or guidance. You're here now, Maria said simply. That's what matters. The transfer happened the following week. Elena left for Cebu with promises to call regularly and visit whenever possible. Maria continued her training with a new sense of purpose and identity. But the most significant change was in how both sisters approached their military service. Elena threw herself into disaster relief work, using her leadership skills to coordinate rescue operations and humanitarian aid. She became known for her dedication to protecting civilians and her ability to inspire her team during crisis situations. Maria completed her basic training with honors and requested assignment to the military police unit. She wanted to work in a role where she could protect people and uphold justice, influenced by her experience of how power could be abused. 6 months later, when Maria graduated from her advanced training program, Elena was granted leave to attend the ceremony. As Maria stood with her graduating class, receiving recognition for her outstanding performance, Elena watched from the audience with tears of pride. After the ceremony, the sisters stood together outside the base chapel where they had first begun to rebuild their relationship. "I have something for you," Elena said, reaching into her bag. She pulled out a small jewelry box and handed it to Maria. Inside was a necklace with a pendant shaped like an angel wing. "This was our mother's," Elena explained. "She gave it to me the day before she died, and I've carried it with me ever since. I think it's time it went to someone who understands what it means to be protected by angels." Maria fastened the necklace around her neck, feeling the weight of family history and hope. "What happens now?" she asked, echoing the question she had posed months earlier. "Now, we build the relationship we should have had all along," Elena replied. "It won't erase the past, but maybe we can create a future that honors the love that brought us back together." As they walked toward the base entrance where Carmen and Roberto were waiting to celebrate Maria's graduation, both sisters understood that their story was really just beginning. They had found each other across years of separation and pain, but more importantly, they had found a way to transform that pain into purpose. The birthmark that had caused so much humiliation in that barracks had ultimately become the key to healing two broken lives. Sometimes the things that make us feel most vulnerable are actually our greatest strengths, waiting for the right moment to reveal their true purpose. Maria Santos, Elena Rose Vasquez, was finally whole, surrounded by the family who had raised her with love and reunited with the sister who would support her future. The angel mark had done its job, protecting her not just from physical harm, but from a lifetime of not knowing who she really was. And Elena Vasquez, no longer bitter and isolated, had rediscovered the person she was meant to be, a protector, a leader, and most importantly, a sister who would never let her family down again.